I'm going to start to wake you all up with a short film, which will give you a very short film, which will just give you a bit of background on the city of Liverpool for those of you who don't know it.
Any city that has stood on the same spot for 800 years knows something about highs and lows. But Liverpool is not like any other city. The Mersey is not just any spot, and the glorious highs and devastating lows which shape this place are extreme. The majesty of the buildings tells a story of a city of innovation and firsts, which led the way for others to follow, which made the world smaller with the first transatlantic steamship, the first passenger railway, and the first wet dock, which in a generation became a global name, a financial giant, and a window to the world. Home to thinkers and doers, the like of which there had never been before. Some on the right side of history, some on the wrong, but leaving a tapestry of ideas that defines Liverpool to this very day. As the power of the sea grew, Liverpool grew. From strength to strength, money, ideas, power. But then, the world changed. Liverpool emerged battered, blinking into a bleak midwinter, selling something which no one wanted. Against that decline, creativity soared. Lads who shook the world, players that changed the game. Where once the name of the city travelled the world on the hull of ships, now it did so through lyrics in bedrooms and scarves on terraces. But the centre of the creative universe in the 60s gave way to the darkness of the 80s. Riots, a nation turning its back, a disaster and injustice which still burns bright today. That pain defined a generation, a pain that would have crushed a different city. But not this city. This city of solidarity and justice. This city which earned a lifeline. 2008, capital of culture. A spotlight back on a city which craved the limelight. A new story to tell. An extraordinary year kickstarts an incredible renaissance. Culture defeating the global financial crash, and 10 years later, a city reborn. The Mersey glistens a little brighter. The buildings carry an extra sparkle. The pavements crackle with energy. But cities are not about roads or parks, about buildings or architecture. That is just the stage for the people of Liverpool, the people who dreamed this city. The people who fought for this city. The people who refused to give up on it. The people of yesterday, of today, and of tomorrow. Resilient, warm, creative. Liverpool.
I've never actually shown that film in public before. It's quite emotional actually watching it, so it kind of been a bit emotional after that. Is this mic working? Am I okay? No? I'll stand. Yeah, okay, fine. So what I'm going to do is now take you through the story of the city and kind of how we've changed over the last 30 years and talk about creative placemaking. You saw in the film 30 years ago, Liverpool was in a very different place than it is now. Its confidence had gone, it was in the middle, it was torn between two governments, a local government who were creating decline and a national government who were talking about managed decline. So the city had been forgotten about by its national government, but also its local government was doing things like this. This was going to be turned into a car park. This is the Albert Dock now. So how did it get to this? There were some absolutely incredible thinkers. So Michael Heseltine, who is a favoured, interestingly, because he's of the wrong political persuasion than the city, but a favoured son of the city, decided that if you'd had this city that was one of the great cities of the empire, that had fallen on such hard times, where it was selling its national museums, so national museums then went into, so our museums were given national status to make sure that they were saved. He thought, what can you do in cities like Liverpool to kind of create a new hope and a new future? And it was very interesting talking to David, listening to David speaking earlier, because what they did was they thought of culture. And the Tate Gallery was the first thing that came into Liverpool to start to create what is now a 30-year cultural renaissance. And when you listen to Michael Heseltine talk, he talks about taking a risk. He didn't know if it was going to work. He didn't know if kind of putting one of the world's most famous museums, which has got history to Liverpool in fairness, into the Albert Dock would make a huge difference. And the difference that it made was incredible. When I came to start to work for the city in the late 1980s, the city was an incredibly different place. You know, it had lost its confidence. So the city that created the Beatles, that has got two of the best football teams, or one, some of you may think, but two of the best football teams, and is one of the most creative cities really on the planet, has given that to the world, had lost its confidence and had lost its kind of way of feeling about itself and had lost its way of how to project itself to the world. And a big part of that was the way that the national media spoke about the city. It spoke about it as a self-pity city. It spoke about it in the most derogatory terms. And the national government turned their back on one of its greatest cities. And that is actually a national disgrace. European Capital of Culture was a very interesting thing for us. There were 12 cities that bid for European Capital of Culture. Liverpool bid because we had just changed political administration, and we thought, we'll bid, we can just be shortlisted. So this city, this incredible city, had lost its confidence so much that it thought we will just bid in order to be shortlisted. Now, we did a very different thing with our European Capital of Culture bid. We didn't just use it as a marketing tool, so a chance to say, aren't we fantastic? You know, we've done all these brilliant things. We used it to change the way that we delivered arts and culture as a city. So instead of what used to happen is that the cities, the cultural organisations, the great cultural organisations of our city and nationally, would go into communities and tell communities what they wanted to do to them. We wanted to turn that round and work instead with our communities, telling those cultural organisations which artists they wanted to work with. And if we did nothing else, if we didn't win European Capital of Culture, we would have changed the way that the city talked about itself, but also how it worked with culture and how it worked with the arts. But we did win. And we weren't the favourite. Newcastle Gateshead was actually the favourite. And there was a moment in the city, for the first time that I've ever been there, where you really felt its shoulders go up. And it was the thought of winning something for something that was good. And then in usual ways that happen when you win big prizes like this, the whole city fell apart for about 5 years. There were lots of falling outs. Artistic directors walked out. Executive directors walked out. There was a big, very... Phil Redmond, who was our chair, called it a Scouse wedding, which basically everyone has a fight, and then we get to the end, and then we turn it on. And it was the most incredible programme. That's the statistics around it. I'll just skip to the next one. But we really treated it as a scholarship, not a prize. And to really look at what it would mean for the next generation. So it wasn't a thank you, aren't you brilliant for what you've done. It was actually using culture as a way to think about what we could achieve and what we could be in the future. And one of the big programs that we did was a program called Creative Communities, which had never been done before in a European Capital of Culture context. We spent £11 million, which is a huge amount of money given to us by Europe, to look at the issues that were facing communities and how we could use culture to get communities listened to more by the people in power. So we did projects around racism, we did projects around homophobia, but it was a huge and incredibly significant part of what previously had been the glittering prizes, you know, your museums, your galleries, your outdoor events, you know, your calling card to the world. Well, our calling card to the world was about how communities can have a voice through their city. It's because I've gone back, hasn't it? Can you just skip 2? Thank you. So 2 things. Liverpool's change, the culture, what we do with culture is look at it in 2 ways. One is about the physical. One is about how you change a city physically. So it becomes a kind of better place to live, the qualities of design, how you kind of change the cultural infrastructure. And I'll just show you a few lovely pictures here. This is the Everyman Theatre. The Everyman Theatre, very interesting, won the Sterling Prize, rebuilt it from the grounds up, used the very bricks that it was born on. It's a very radical theatre, a very personal voice of the city, but used that in design and won the Sterling Prize. New Museum of Liverpool, you know, a city with such great heritage, has now a place to host that heritage, but also to look to its future, a brand new building on the revitalised pier head. Tate Liverpool, one of the oldest forms of regeneration, Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Hall, and the Royal Court. We've spent a huge amount of resources on reinventing our cultural sector, but also creating places that people want to be. And Liverpool, I think, is one of the most transformed cities in Europe over the last 10 years physically. But more importantly, it's about emotional. So it's about how you change your citizens, the people that live in your place, to feel proud and to feel confident about the place they live. And the way that we're looking at this is, while I talk about the 1980s and I talk about the past of Liverpool, the generation that is growing up there now doesn't remember that. You know, they think they live in the most exciting place on the planet. They've got a very, very different view of the city. So while we talk very much about the past informing our future, it's also really important that we remember there's a whole future yet to come, and that those young people don't necessarily want to talk about the Hatton years or the 1980s or, you know, or any of the rest. They want to talk about what their future is in the place that they love. And there, I've given you a Beatle, one Beatle, who represents both heritage and future. You know, he's invested very heavily in the kind of next generation of musicians in the city. Liverpool's a very interesting place. Culture goes through everything that it does. So it goes through its health, its well-being agenda, it goes through its housing agenda. It's not just sat in a little place somewhere where we have our museums and our galleries and our cultural organisations. We talk about it as a frontline service. And these are some lovely things. This is what happens when you do it well. You know, we support about 35 organisations. We support them very well, and even in austere times, which the UK has been going through, we've never cut our cultural organisations. So we believe in a 365 day a year offer. We believe in organisations that kind of give something back, that can kind of voices that can come through, and we believe in it for all ages. You can have a look at all those. And how do you make this work? So how do you kind of create this kind of whole ecology of a city? And I think these are the things that we need to look at. And this is what we looked at in Liverpool, and we've done it over 15 years. It will be very different for all of you. We do support our cultural organisations properly and well. The financial support that we give is important. They need longevity and they need to be able to plan ahead. We have got incredible political support, and that is hugely important and cannot be underestimated. You know, we have politicians who believe in the value of culture, who get it and who support it. And more importantly, actually, we have public demand. I mean, you'll see some images later, but Liverpool people love culture and the arts. You know, they love football. They are passionate about kind of coming together in great audiences and sharing a common identity which culture kind of can give you. And we also have creative ambition. We haven't just stood still after a major event like a European Capital of Culture and said, that's brilliant, tick, we've done that now. You know, we're constantly thinking about what's next, how do you redefine a city like Liverpool, which is very much at the edge of the UK. You know, it looks out to America and to Ireland rather than looks back to London. It's a very quirky, spiky city, some would say. And it's got a social curiosity. You know, Liverpool is not a city that just sits back and just takes things. You know, incredibly bolshy, it's always got something to say. And that's a very, very exciting place to be creatively. And then we're talking about inclusive growth. So while the city centre has kind of boomed, and you know, around the football stadiums, for those of you that support the football teams, you'll see they've boomed. There are communities that are still incredibly poor, that don't feel included in stuff. So our next job over the next 10 years is to actually engage, is to start spreading that kind of city centre growth out to communities. And although some stuff has happened, we're still not there yet as a city. And these are the three things that I think are important. So a stable cultural sector. There is no point us doing some of the incredible events that we've done that really shine a spotlight on the city internationally if we haven't got a stable sector that is a day-to-day sector. We do a whole programme of major events that is interesting, that take moments of the city's life and kind of blow it up big. So take tiny stories and give them a huge international stage. And you need that because we're in an incredibly competitive market in the UK, especially around tourism, but also to kind of keep building on that sense of confidence that was lost 20 years ago, but then that kind of needs to keep being reinforced. And our mayor has said for the last 10 years that culture is the rocket fuel for regeneration, and we've stuck to that line. So the whole, whether you're talking about the science sector or the university sector, anyone who talks about Liverpool will talk about culture being the rocket fuel for our regeneration. So it's keeping that belief and that kind of strength in what culture can offer. And in January, we've done a very quite brave thing, I think, really, is look at, actually, once you've done a major event, like a European Capital of Culture, how do you measure and how do you kind of really prove that it's worked? So has 10 years of us continue to invest in culture and the cultural industries, has that worked? And we will be releasing this in January. But there is no doubt that if this is a very different city than it was 20 years ago. You can feel it. You can feel it in the fizz on the streets. You can feel it when people pour out of the cruise liner terminal. You can feel it in the confidence of the next generation. And this is what you get. So one of the things that we've done exceptionally well as a city is used our heritage, our beautiful buildings, to engage not just the people of Liverpool, but also the people of the world. And we've done major events. We've worked very closely with a company called Royal Deluxe in the city, who bring huge, large-scale, but very tiny human stories. And this is probably one of the most joyful events that I've ever worked on. It was quite incredible. It happened 3 weeks ago. We had 1.5 million people in the city. They came out. But what was more amazing, and this is what we need to think about in culture, when you get it right, this audience was talking about the same thing, and they were talking about magic, and they were talking about dreaming, and they were talking about being in a different place, to their children, to their grandchildren. For 3 days in Liverpool, 1 million people believed in giants. And in the world that we're in at the moment, I'd take that any day. So when you do culture, when you really believe in it, when you build a long-term strategy, when you don't deviate from your goals, I think you get a place where people believe in magic. And that creates a city that people want to live in and they want to grow up in and you want to bring your kids up in. So I'll stop there. Thank you.